Hey everybody, welcome to Wednesday's live stream. So we're going to talk about a few questions here. Let's jump right in with a question about SAT math. Beware of the vortex. The vortex is ending soon. Okay, here we go. So here we go. This question is from the non-calculator portion of an SAT. And there's two strategies for doing this question. I'm going to talk about the basic one first, and then I'm going to talk about sort of the more logical one after. The basic thing you can use every time you see something asking about the number of solutions for a parabola is to set everything equal to 0. So that is move the t over. So 2x squared minus 4x minus t equals 0. And then you're going to use part of the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, definitely worth memorizing. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the quadratic formula, and there's really two pieces. This outside piece tells you about the x-coordinate of the vertex, and this inside piece tells you the number of solutions. So that's what we care about here. This is called the discriminant down here. Right? And that word doesn't matter. What matters is that you know that you can use this piece to tell you the number of solutions. If this thing is positive, 2 solutions. If this thing is negative, there's 0 solutions. If it's just the number 0, and there's 1 solution. Okay, so to be clear, A, B, and C are, this is A, this is B, and C is this negative t value. So all we care about is B squared. Well, that's negative 4 squared. And then minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is negative t. Be careful of that negative sign. That really matters here. So that's 16. And then this works out to what? Positive 8t. This has to be a negative number to have no real solutions. And then you could just try out your values, or you could kind of solve it. You could say, well, if I wanted to solve to see what t, I could move this over and say 8t equals 16 or something. But ultimately, what we have to do here is just find a negative value. T has to be more negative, so to speak, or less than negative 2. If t were negative 2, it's 16 minus 16, and that's 0. So that's not going to work. We need t to be more negative, is another way of saying it. And the only value that works there is this one. So that's using the discriminant. That's the key there. The other thing you could do is kind of think of these as 2 separate equations. If you thought of it as like y equals 2x squared minus 4x, and another equation that's like y equals t, then it's sort of like you're setting these equal to each other to solve. And that can be really useful too, because think about it. Without thinking too hard, you know that 2x squared minus 4x opens up. If you don't know that, that's okay. But the a value, this value that's attached to x squared, that as a positive number means the equation opens up, right? So even if we just sort of put something like this on the screen, we don't even know if this is the right equation, but something opening up. My point is y equals t is a horizontal line, and we need it to be somewhere below the parabola, right? So, of course, the lowest value is going to be right, because if there were multiple values that work, it wouldn't be a good SAT question. Only one value can work, and this is the lowest one. So if there's at least one thing below this parabola, it's the lowest value for our horizontal line y equals t. All right, that's the first question. And if you have more questions about this stuff, by all means, vortex went away, back to face. By all means, get back in touch. We'd be happy to give you more details. But in the interest of time, let's move on to another question. And I think the next one we're going to look at, I want to say it's a writing question. I have it queued up here. Back to the vortex, back to the chalkboard. I apologize for the vortex. If the vortex is pissing you off, I am sorry. I haven't figured out a way to get rid of the vortex in between questions, but it doesn't bother me too much. Yes, so this is a grammar question. First thing to say is that number 8 here is really this question. Just a weird formatting issue online, but this is the question. And a student was wondering more generally about how to combine underlined sentences. Couple things you want to keep in mind here. The first thing you want to keep in mind is that you want to keep roughly the same order of these ideas. Roughly the same order. The original ones, that is, the original sentences as they're written, are fine. But we want to combine the sentences, which kind of means we want to show how these sentences relate to each other in a more meaningful way than just as 2 separate sentences. So keep things in roughly the same order and try to demonstrate some sort of a meaning between the sentences. So if you mix up the order too much, it's probably wrong. Maybe one thing moves, but not too many things. And then the other thing is, don't just change like the period right here. Don't just change that to like a semicolon. That's not going to make a big difference. So think about trying to create a meaningful relationship between these ideas. Typically, words like also and are weak and don't create strong, meaningful relationships between ideas. But let's see what happens here. The original is, the result was an explosion of mural painting that spread throughout California and the southwestern United States in the 1970s. It, meaning the mural painting explosion, was the Chicano mural movement. Okay, how do we combine these? Well, let's look at A. The result was an explosion. Okay, well, that's the beginning part anyways. The Chicano mural movement, that got moved way up, which is maybe okay, of mural painting that spread throughout the California and Western United States. Okay, the thing I don't like about this, most of all, is to separate explosion from of mural painting. Explosion of mural painting. This is a prepositional phrase of mural painting. It refers to the explosion, and there's no real good reason to separate this with the Chicano mural movement. So I don't like breaking that phrase up. And I would say that just moving things around and then this prepositional phrase getting broken up is enough for me to downgrade this answer and look for a better answer. Not cross it off, just say, I don't know, it doesn't really look like what we're looking for. The result was the Chicano mural movement, an explosion of mural painting that spread throughout California and the southwestern United States in the 1970s. Now, we did move the Chicano mural movement up, but we do have essentially a full sentence, right, ending with movement, followed by an explanation of what that movement was. That seems fine. Let's look at C. The explosion of mural painting that spread through California and the southwestern United States in the 1970s was the resulting Chicano mural movement. Okay, a nice rule of thumb is avoid extra INGs. Like, do we need to say resulting? I think we said result in other spots. So usually avoid the ING at the end of a word that you don't need to put an ING on. So the explosion that spread through was the resulting Chicano mural movement. Another thing to notice is that the word was here. That word is usually attached to INGs, and though we use the word was in other versions here, that's something that you want to avoid, the verb to be followed by an ING if you can. So I don't like C as much, and I would say I definitely like B the most so far. An explosion of mural painting resulted, and it spread through California. Okay, so look, this semicolon I'm noticing here is like the mistake that I wanted to avoid. They mixed up some stuff from the original. It's more mixed up, and then they just replaced the semicolon with a period with a semicolon. So it's probably not right. I would go with B here. It's simple. It uses the least punctuation, which is always a good thing in grammar. And even though we moved one little piece around, we didn't move the sentence all around. We didn't add an extra ING. And we didn't break up this prepositional phrase, explosion of mural painting. So those would be the ways that I'm judging here. I hope that helps. These are some of the more complicated grammar questions that you'll run into, and we'd be happy to answer more clarifying questions. But in the meantime, let's move on here. I'm going to avoid the vortex, I should say, avoid the vortex. And I'm going to see if we can put up the last basic question we had. We had a big picture question we're going to talk about. All right, this is an interesting one. Let me do this. I want to be able to look at the question for a second, and I also want to look at the passage. This is a reading question. And this is an interesting one. According to the narrator, one consequence of Silas adopting epi is that, by the way, this is from practice test 7. A student asked us to talk about this question from SAT 7 reading. One consequence of Silas adopting epi. Now, I understand that most of you probably haven't seen this, but I am going to speak in specifics for this student's sake. But suffice to say, you could back up and read this passage if you want, and then come back to the video a little bit later. Essentially, it's about an old guy who adopts. He's a miser. He's like always counting his money, and then he adopts this little girl, and she changes his life. The things I want to notice here are the word all, the word nature, really that, and just the vagueness of answer choice D. Looks forward to a different kind of future. That is so vague. If you said that in English class, your teacher would be like, give me more, dude. Give me more details. But that ends up being the right answer. The things I want you to notice is that this guy is super greedy, and you can go back and find details of that. He's super greedy, but the word all is too extreme. If you see words like all or only or must or never, these words are too strong. They're almost always wrong. You notice I didn't say always wrong because then I'm making the same mistake that the question would make, right? Aha. So no, we're avoiding language like this because it's a little bit too strong. So I would probably not pick A just for that reason. And now I want to talk about the word nature. So nature, this passage, I'll even pull it up here. There's a whole section where they're out sort of frolicking in the fields. That's like this part. There's buttercups in meadows, and hedgerows, flowers, right? And there's a bird singing. This is an answer choice. I'm not saying that every time that word comes up, it's wrong, but better understands his place in nature. He's hanging out in a field with this little girl, and he's enjoying her company. But that doesn't really mean that he understands his place in nature, right? And look, this ends up being an evidence set. I don't want to get into all the details of evidence sets, but like when you see exact language from evidence in answer choices, it's probably something to avoid, right? So to be clear, the way you should do evidence questions is you should always spend some time. You should never pick an answer to 5 before you've found the lines for 4 that work. Or I'm sorry, the lines for 6 that work. Let's see if we can find the lines that match what ends up being the right answer. 9 through 16. Yeah, I think this is it. It says that Epi was an object that forced his thoughts onward and carried them far away from their old eager pacing. Carry them away to new things that would come with the coming years. That's definitely something that says, so it was 11 through 16 here ends up being the right answer. Those lines literally say he's looking forward to a future, and it's a different kind of future. That's perfect. There's probably, let's just kind of see if we can find one of these 2 last sets, 41 or 61. Somewhere in there is going to be talking about nature. Yeah, look at this stuff. This stuff right here is totally tempting you to talk about nature. But just because she's like hearing the birds and that he learned something, okay, so that's really tempting. But he's really just learning how to like play with this little kid in nature. That doesn't mean he really knows his place in nature. That doesn't mean he like knows who he is in the grand scheme of nature. So look, that's the kind of stuff that's really tempting. And people will totally be pushed towards that answer choice. The other lines were 61. That's just about her growing up a little bit. So the big things, let's go back to just the question itself. Avoid extreme language. And then, you know, this is going to be a tempting answer, but really make sure if you like one of the words, if you fall in love with the word nature, you're like, oh my God, that's me trying to draw a heart. This is like the worst heart ever. If you really love the word nature here, make sure you then, in a disciplined way, focus on this other part. Is it like that he understands his place in nature? He doesn't understand his place in nature. He's just learning to play with this little girl in the field. So this answer, which is super vague, ends up being right. And vague answers are usually the best. So that's a few questions that we were asked by students. And please keep them coming. We'd be happy to help you on any question you want on the SAT and the ACT. Today we didn't have any ACT questions. But I also want to address one other question which relates to what we were just talking about. Somebody asked us about how to attack the reading test. And particularly the student was wondering, should they skip the reading and jump straight to the questions? And that's not a good idea. I understand the sentiment is good. The sentiment is good because what that means is you're thinking, well, not everything matters and I should just go find out what the questions are even asking me. That's a good mindset, but I don't want you to skip the reading altogether. What I want you to do is I want you to read beginnings and ends of paragraphs to look for the main idea of every paragraph, right? So, you know, perhaps I'll just jump in and do one of these real quick. So let's screen share one more time. Pardon the vortex, the coming vortex here. Let's just jump to like the next passage that we see in this test. And I'm going to take no more than like 3 minutes to do this. Read the introduction. So it says, how technology is destroying jobs. Well, great. That sounds super optimistic. It's also written in 2013, so it's not old. MIT business scholars, this guy and this other guy, have argued that impressive advances in computer technology are largely behind the sluggish employment. I'm going to go to the end of the paragraph, which is really this full sentence. Even more ominous for workers, they foresee dismal prospects for many jobs as these powerful new technologies are increasingly adopted in all these areas. Okay, so I'm going to try to read beginnings and ends of the paragraphs the rest of the way through. That was hard in that spot. That robots, automation, and software can replace people might seem obvious to anyone. And look, I would jump down, but this word but, right? Everybody knows the power of the word but. Whatever came before this, something different is going to come after. So it says their claim is more troubling and controversial. They suspect something similar is happening in technology or technologically advanced countries. It's destroying jobs faster, I see up here. Okay, as evidence, these guys point to a chart that only an economist could love. So we're talking about economics. I'm going to go to the end of the passage, or the end of the paragraph. By 2011, a significant gap appears between the two lines, showing economic growth with no parallel increase in job creation. So economic growth, but no new jobs. Okay, so there's like more prosperity or more money, more productivity, but no new jobs. They call it the great decoupling. And this guy says he is confident that technology is behind both the healthy growth in productivity and the weak growth in jobs. Okay, so let's just pause and say, we're saying that robots are taking jobs away. No surprise there. And what we're also saying is that productivity is going up even though there's no jobs. That's a startling assertion because it threatens the faith that many economists place in technological progress. Okay, so somehow that people have faith in technological progress and it's startling. Let's go to the end of the paragraph. Productivity is at record levels. Innovation has never been faster. And yet at the same time, we have a falling median income and we have fewer jobs. People are falling behind because technology is advancing so fast and our skills and organizations aren't keeping up. Okay, so the same idea, right? No new ideas really. While technological changes can be painful for workers whose skills no longer match the needs of employers, Lawrence Katz says that no historical pattern shows these shifts leading to a net decrease in jobs over an extended period. Okay, so this is the point where the guy comes in and says, I kind of disagree and don't worry. Let's go to the end of the paragraph. There is no long-term trend of eliminating work for people. Over the long term, employment rates are fairly stable. People have always been able to create new jobs. People come up with new things to do. Okay. Still, Katz doesn't dismiss the notion that there is something different about today's digital technologies, something that could affect a broader range of work. End of the passage. Though Katz expects the historical pattern to hold, it is genuinely a question, he says. If technology disrupts enough, who knows what will happen? Okay, so I hope that that process that I just went through shows you that by reading like, I don't know, 20, 30% of the passage, you can get the idea of this passage. You can understand what this passage is about, and you did so without getting every word. You also know where key information is located, like an introduction to the idea, something about economists, something about the fact that it's startling and surprising. This guy Katz that said, you know, he's kind of skeptical of this idea. And that's a common structure. So I want you to be thinking structurally as you work through reading passages, trying to understand basically what's being said, but don't worry about every detail. So to the student who asked if they should skip the reading and go straight to the questions, your heart is in the right place. You should definitely be looking to avoid reading too much. Absolutely. But I don't want to give the impression that you should skip altogether. Instead, I want you to spend, I don't know, 2 minutes, maybe less. If you're reading quietly or reading silently to yourself, I think you can do what I just did in 2 minutes. So do that. Now you have plenty of time to answer the questions. All right, so that's all we have time for today, but I hope you folks will keep questions coming. Whether you're a parent or a college counselor or a student, please ask questions. We'd be happy to help out. So we'll be back tomorrow, I think probably in the later part of the evening, but a lot of you folks will get an email about that. I'll put it on YouTube and you can see when we're going to be live. But we look forward to seeing you then. Take care.